Hey guys, this is Austin. Do you remember Vaio? Back in the 90s and 2000s, Sony absolutely cranked out weird but cool designs. Over the last few years though, things have been a little bit quiet on the Vaio front ever since they went independent in 2014. That is until today with the brand new Vaio SX14. Take one look at this red and yeah, it looks dope. However, the rest of the build quality sadly does not quite match up with the looks. Now sure, it feels lightweight, however, it just doesn't have that same premium feel as you would expect when you're paying upwards of $2,000 for a brand new laptop. It's sturdy enough, but put it side by side with one of my favorite laptops of 2019 so far, the Asus ZenBook S13, and it's really no contest. The only advantage here of the Vaio hardware really is just that lightness, but besides that, this beats it in pretty much every other aspect. Speaking of the ZenBook, they do share a very similar keyboard design. So not only do they have nice chiclet keys, but importantly they also have a lifted design. So essentially when you close the laptops they go flat. Okay, that's actually not what I thought was gonna happen. But when you open it up, you get a little bit of an extra lift on the keyboard, and this goes a long way in making it feel a lot more comfortable, especially for longer typing sessions. Now it might sound like I'm being a little bit too negative about the Vaio, but there are some legitimate strengths starting with the ports. This has more ports than any other Ultrabook I've ever seen. So on top of 3 USB 3.0 ports, there's also not only a USB-C as well as HDMI, but there's Ethernet, and there's even a VGA port on a brand new Ultrabook in 2019. Yeah, that's a Japanese businessman special. Like I was saying earlier, the keyboard does have a nice feel and you also do have a fingerprint sensor on board, but what I'm not a huge fan of is the touchpad. Now yeah, it's nice to have the physical buttons, but this is just way smaller than pretty much any modern laptop, and it does date the Vaio just a little bit. Now by default it does come with a 14-inch 1080p display, but this red model is the higher end version with a full 4K panel. Now I'm usually not a huge fan of 4K displays in Ultrabooks, as I find they usually have a little bit too much of a trade-off as far as battery life goes, but I will definitely admit this does look nice, super sharp, super crisp. Unfortunately though, battery life is not the strong suit of the Vaio at all. Paired with a small battery, this just feels like a throwback. Now admittedly, I do use the computer fairly hard, so I've got the brightness cranked almost all the way up and high performance mode on, but even so, I'm only getting about 3.5 hours on a charge with this guy. Pretty much every other Ultrabook out there, even when you're completely cranking out, should give you at least 5 to 6 hours, so that's something that I'm not super thrilled about. It's definitely probably the weakest part of this Vaio, to be totally honest. I mean, it's fine, it's usable if you're near an outlet, but it's just really weird in 2019 to have a laptop with that little battery life. Thankfully, performance is modern at least. So not only do you have the latest 8th generation Core i7 on board, but this guy is also outfitted with 16 gigs of RAM and a super fast 1TB PCIe SSD. There's no doubt that this looks dope in red, but when you take it as an entire package, the SX14 just falls behind. Not only is the battery life poor and there's some weird design decisions, but most importantly, it is really expensive. This thing starts at $1,300 bucks, but if you want to get the maxed out version in red, that's going to cost you $2,300. Put that side by side with the ZenBook, and it's really no comparison. I will take this pretty much any day. However, that got me thinking. Vaio used to be the undisputed champ when it comes to weird and premium laptops, so what exactly happened? So as you might be able to tell, some time has passed because we were waiting for some old school Vaios to show up straight from Japan. But there's some really cool stuff here. So first of all, we have the Vaio X505. Now at first glance, this could totally be a laptop that's being sold today. However, it actually came out in 2004. Yes, my friends, we've got a Japanese copy of Windows XP loaded up on this bad boy, and it's kind of awesome. Considering that this came out 4 years before the MacBook Air, it's actually not that far behind. Now, yeah, the 10.4-inch display isn't massive by today's standards, but one of the cool things is that you actually get some kind of interesting thinness. I mean, this is honestly thinner than most laptops you can buy today, and this was way before the days of USB-C. I mean, look, this is literally the Wi-Fi antenna. Or the Wi-Fi card. Now my Japanese skills aren't quite good enough to figure out how to get this thing over to English, but it does have a whopping 1.2 gigs of RAM, which I think actually someone paid to upgrade. As you might imagine, a laptop like this was not exactly cheap, even in Japan back in 2004. I mean, what was the actual price on this guy? $3,000. $3,000 new, and that was back in 2004. Whoo, yeah. But hey, it's okay, you've got a 10 gigabyte hard drive, you'll be just fine. Update, I was wrong, 20 gigabyte hard drive. That's where it's at right there. It's also surprisingly light, it's just about 2 pounds, and a lot of that is just the battery in the back. A big part of that is because it is made out of a composite carbon fiber. Now when you look at this kind of stuff, sure, $3,000 was a lot back in the day, but you were legitimately getting something that was way ahead of its time. Whereas the current day VAIO, I mean, it's not a bad laptop, but you're still paying a premium price for something that's really not in that same kind of league of, wow, this looks like it could be made today. If you ignore the fact that it doesn't have a touchpad and it has a little nipple. Now, as cool as this is, we're just getting started with some of these awesome old VAIO designs. Next up is the PCG 505 from 1998. Now yeah, this looks a little bit on the thicker and heavier side compared to stuff that's modern, but again, this was the late 90s. This was absolutely tiny compared to what most people were carrying around. Now sadly, this model doesn't actually function, although it would be cool if it did, but we can take a look at the hardware and see just how far ahead of its time it was. So not only do we have a USB-A port, which believe it or not, for the late 90s was very impressive. We also have a series of other ports, including my favorite, a little modem that kind of pops into the side here. And on top of that, if we pop the little side of the screen, we have a good old stylus. Now no, stylus is not a touchscreen, but you could use this in conjunction with the touchpad to write the world's tiniest little notes. Now if USB and Firewire aren't your thing, you could also get this giant dongle for it. Now this adds a ton of additional ports, including you have PS2, you have VGA. Where does this plug in? Wait, it doesn't go in there. Actually, wait. Oh, I'm stupid. The cool part about this is that this was very much in an era where laptops were nowhere near as good as desktops for most categories, right? They were way more expensive, they usually had terrible battery life, terrible performance, but this was a major step forward toward a super portable laptop that could actually get real work done. You can even add a Wi-Fi card on the side. Actually, I have one here, don't I? So with this, now we're online, not even having to use our super cool modem. Probably one of the craziest models the VAIO ever brought out was this, the UX 180p. And no, my friends, this is not a giant sidekick. This is a full-fledged Windows XP computer. Now, if you want to talk about ahead of its time, this is absolutely it. Now, again, keep in mind, we're talking about 2006 here. We have a touchscreen with a stylus. It has not only Wi-Fi, but it also has built-in cellular. There's even a fingerprint sensor and both a front and rear-facing camera on this guy. And we're talking about 2006. Now this is not exactly a blazing fast system with a Core Solo processor and half a gigabyte of RAM, but when you consider just the level of spec you're able to get in something this small, it's really impressive. I mean seriously, fingerprint sensors are still a good thing to have on laptops, right? They're by no means ubiquitous in 2019, and especially when you look at stuff like cellular networks, again, that's something that is not standard whatsoever yet, and yet this weird little computer from 2006 totally had it. I mean that's innovation, dude. Like, there's no way of getting around that. This was so far ahead of its time. At least it came preloaded with Norton in 2006, so I'm sure that'll be very helpful for our ancient Windows XP install. Also, fun fact, this was product placement central in movies back in the late 2000s. Not only was it in National Treasure, but it was even in Paul Blart Mall Cop. You know, that famous American movie that everyone is totally in love with, right? So the next item is the VAIO P, which came out, for the record, 10 years ago in 2009. I believe it probably shipped with XP or maybe Vista at the time. But someone, whoever had this before us, loaded up Windows 10 on it. Man, you're gonna have to use this for a week, you know. What? This is gonna be your new laptop for the next week. It runs Windows 10, man. It's fully up to date, security patches and all. What is actually this thing even running? We've got a blistering fast single core Atom processor, 2 gigs of RAM, as well as a 60 gigabyte hard drive. But I mean, it does legitimately run Windows 10. I cannot believe someone did this. Like, I mean, that's so, like, It's actually, I will say one thing. A lot of these computers from this era, they shipped with Windows XP and they were Windows Vista compatible because Vista was so much more heavy on the resources. But most of the time, you can actually load up Windows 10 on a Vista compatible machine and Windows 10 will actually run better, which is pretty impressive considering that it's like a 12-year newer operating system. Oh, we have Wi-Fi. It sees our Wi-Fi network. God, dude, this thing is so cool. I'm blown away this runs Windows 10. I legitimately thought we were gonna turn this thing on, it's gonna have Windows XP. I mean, this thing even has decent ports. You have a pair of USB-A's as well as you can pick up a dongle which has VGA as well as Ethernet on it. And on top of all of that, It has a glorious ultra-wide display, way before LG ever made it cool. Now, when these were all new, Vaio was known as a bit of a form over function company. Now, Sony had a ton of cash and a ton of interesting ideas, and a lot of these were legitimately super unique, but they also did have some sacrifices, right? But that's okay. Today, when you look at laptops, they're all so similar, right? I mean, you get a slightly tapered design, you get a couple of extra ports, that makes it something unique. However, back in the day, I mean, something like this just did not exist. Something like this didn't exist. I mean, this stuff is so cool, and I think that's absolutely something we need today in current PC designs. More innovation, more willingness to take risks. I mean, it's absolutely good for everyone. Also, this is still my favorite thing ever. It runs Windows XP, man. How are you gonna complain about that?